Hi, this is
All
Matthew.
right.
I got my one of my good friends, Mary Gibson, on the phone, and Mary Gibson is going to interview my mum, June Payne, who's in heaven, and so she's on the phone. She's just talking on my mobile phone, and so she's going to have question time with my mother for as long as she likes, and my mother's going to answer her questions. So go ahead, Mary, and make it interesting for listeners and Christians and non-Christians to listen to what's going on.
Well, hello. This is amazing. I am so thrilled to be able to talk to Matthew's mother, to June. Can I call you June or Miss Payne?
June is fine. I don't go by Payne anymore.
That's true. I've been talking to Matthew about the video for the John Lennon and talking about heaven. As a person on earth, I just want to know, now that you're in heaven, you've been gone about 3 weeks. Tell us something that the world would want to hear about heaven. What's something that's just so incredible that you never dreamed was there?
You can go on a water slide. There's a water slide in heaven that goes on for miles and miles and miles. And as you're sliding down the water, it plays film inside the water slide of the person you're thinking about. It plays like a running documentary of their future. And so you can not only go and look at the big screens of heaven of Matthew's future, but you can keep on going to the water slide in your swimmers and go down this water slide and look at 10 years of Matthew's life as you're racing through the rapids of this water slide. And so there's different ways of just like standing and watching a screen with his life, or just watching a portion of his life, or just telling the angels that you just want to watch scene by scene the next 2 years of his life. And rather than watching it on the big screen, you can just go on the water slide, and as you slide down for 20 minutes on this water slide, you watch the next 2 years of his life, scene by scene, decision by decision. And so the film's about Matthew's life, or any saint's life, one of your loved one's life. You can tell the angel at the beginning of the water slide you want to see the next 10 years, or you want to see the next year. And depending on how big the time frame is, that's how detailed you'll see the life. So I go on the slide once a day, and I look at the next week in Matthew's life. And as the days play by, it becomes part of the past. And I watch Matthew make all the decisions and enact everything that he was meant to do during the day. So it sort of keeps you fresh. It keeps you up to date. And especially if you're one of the cloud of witnesses involved in your loved one's life, you can be totally up to date with every decision he's going to make for the next week or the next 2 years.
Wow. Oh, my goodness. Well, I, for one, never liked water slides, so I can't wait to experience that. I never did like roller coasters. I don't like losing my stomach. But, oh, my goodness, that's so amazing. I just want to know tell me about Jesus, about God. When you first saw them, what happened?
I met Jesus, and I really hadn't heard him speak more than 5 times on earth to my mind. He said some important things when I first nursed Matthew's son. Jesus said to me, "Don't get too close to this one." And I only met him 2 times in my life, and Jesus was true to his word that I was never close to Brandon, and nothing can compare. Princess Diana does a good description of Jesus. In her book, Michael Hutchins, when he was interviewed by Matthew from In Excess, he did a good description of Jesus. We had a friend on earth that Matthew calls Kel Willis, a friend of the family, and Matthew used to call his eyes the Jesus eyes. And I don't know if you've ever met anyone, Mary, that you look into their eyes and they can see everything. Like they're looking right through you. And you know that they can see all your sin, or they can see everything about you, and yet they love you anyway. I don't know if have you had anyone in your life like that had the Jesus eyes?
Wow, I'm not sure. I'm really not
sure. So you'd know it if you met. Matthew's really only met a couple of them in his life. Well, Jesus, he's got eternity in his eyes. You can look into his eyes and see creation. You can see the beginning of time. You can see the future. You can see 1,000 years out. What comes out of his eyes is totally unconditional love. On earth, you think you've experienced love, but all of that pales into comparison when you gaze into Jesus' eyes. And he looks totally through you. He can see everything in your past. He's seen everything. You know that he knows you completely. And he's got revelations of you in his eyes that you don't even know yet. He's just got this far surpassing knowledge of you more than you have. And there's no judgment. There's just total love and acceptance. Everyone who meets him, whether it's someone outside the gates in paradise or someone in the higher realms of heaven, everyone meets him, and he meets everyone where they're at. So he can have amazing, astounding knowledge to you, but he could speak in a level that you can't even understand, but he wouldn't speak that to you. He comes just like the Jesus Mary, he speaks in the language that you can understand. So if he's in Australia, he might speak about rugby league and soccer and cricket, and he may speak in those sort of metaphors. But in America, he'd speak in American colloquialism, American football and Nike and basketball and baseball. If he was saying parables in America, he'd be using all those sports as way to illustrate his parables. And so he meets you exactly where you are. I've met him regularly, and he's always meeting me with my updated knowledge and meeting me on that level. And, if it's a lesson to us, we shouldn't be teaching, we shouldn't be interacting with a non-Christian talking about grace and forgiveness and anointing and power of the Holy Spirit, the gifts of the Spirit and prophetic words and stuff. These are all terms non-Christians don't understand. And you've got to address people at where they're at. And, the church has got a major way of even speaking from Christian to Christian, cross denominations. And they're speaking in words like a Baptist doesn't understand the word anointing. A Baptist doesn't understand prophetic word. A Baptist doesn't understand the presence of God. And it doesn't mean that the Baptist doesn't know God. And there's a whole lot of Baptists. I grew up as a Baptist, and there's a whole lot of beautiful spirit, spirit possessed Baptists. So many people in the church, in the Pentecostal church, mock the Baptists and say they're not spirit filled. And yet, me and Matthew know some people in the Baptist church that far surpass any Pentecostal we've ever met. They've got more grace and more love and more understanding and more compassion than any spirit-filled Christian Matthew's ever met. And the Pentecostals will bash the Baptists, and the Baptists will say the Pentecostals are full of demons, and often they are. And the Catholics say they're the original church and there's no other church. And the Seventh-day Adventists say everyone else is lost and only if you fellowship on the Sabbath. And the whole church is divided, but Jesus can speak to any denomination, any cult, any person, Christian, non-Christian, Hindu, Buddhist, Islam, and gay, prostitute. And he speaks in their language, in their colloquialisms, in their sports, in their culture. He speaks to you exactly where you're at. And he's got higher and higher and higher revelation every time I've met him. He's met me where I've grown for the week. He meets me with what I learned in the last week. He knows what I learned. Without talking to me, he knows what level I'm at, and he addresses that level straight away. And so it's true in Matthew's Saints books, where you meet with Jesus once a week in earth time, and he spends 2 hours with you talking about what you've learnt this week. Then he gives you assignments for the next week, and he's just like a river of love coming out of his eyes, and there's nothing you can do that would make him feel disappointed. Even if he was disappointed with you, you'd never, he's never been disappointed with me when I've met him, but I'm sure if he was disappointed in you, it'd be in such a soft and gentle way that you'd want to please him. And of course, there's certain people in heaven that aren't hungry. Certain people just aren't turned on to getting closer and closer to God, the same as earth. And, Matthew had me almost believing that I wasn't even going to make it to heaven. And so I was scared a little bit with Matthew's last talk with me. And yet Jesus has got no condemnation, and the people of heaven are just amazing. They love me, but I can walk down the street and know about them. I can just look at a person and know their past and know who they are. So in heaven, you have a measure of understanding of who everyone is, all the strangers. As you walk down the street, you know things about people. And interesting enough, everyone's thoughts in heaven can be heard. And
Wow.
Different to earth, when you're a great cloud of witness, when you're a witness, one of the cloud of witnesses in a person's life, I can hear every one of Matthew's thoughts. I can come into him and taste his food. He can be eating food and I can be commenting on his food. And so sometimes I'm in him, sometimes I'm walking next to him. And in heaven, there's just such love among the people. And everyone has got characteristics of Jesus in them. Some have got the love, some have got the compassion, some have got mercy, some have got a tremendous teaching gift. Like the Apostle Paul is an amazing teacher, and Moses has just got so much authority, and Enoch has just got this far surpassing love for God, and Elijah has got a bit like Matthew, like a bit of authority and wrath in him, and they've all got dimensions of God in them, and Jesus, everyone in heaven has just got a slice of heaven. They've got a slice of Jesus in them, and everyone is like multicolored and multifaceted, but everyone possesses the character of Jesus. So Jesus is just you can't comprehend his mind. Of course, you have the mind of Christ in heaven, and the Holy Spirit teaches you, but you could just listen to Jesus for 3 days straight, and the children follow him around and flock to him, and he's always got time with children. He's lifting them up and loving them and telling them stories, and you can often see him in a park, and hundreds of children around, and him reading children's stories, and he loves the children and the brokenhearted. And he's just got the most patient and the most kind and understanding. And I've asked him about Matthew, and he just tears up. Every time I ask him questions about Matthew, he just fills up with tears and he cries. And Matthew's life has just brought Jesus so much happiness and so much pain, and I'm finding out so much. I ask him questions about Matthew, and Jesus can just talk forever about my son and what a good friend he's been. And it's true that Jesus hasn't got many friends, and certainly not a lot of friends on earth. And and so he's in pain, you know. He looks over the pain of the world, and I don't see all the pain on the earth. I just see Matthew, and I see a few things, but Jesus got a lot of pain in his eyes. If you've got eyes to see, you know, Matthew used to talk about the pain that Jesus is in, and he shared the music box story with me one time, and you know, it's a foreign concept that Jesus would be in pain, but the pain, when he shares his pain, you know, that is precious, and I just can't believe I've been exalted to such a realm in heaven, and you know, to think that Matthew was just the simplest guy on earth to love, and you understand that love, Mary, because you're like a mother figure to him, and he's just so easy to love, and
yes,
Jesus, when he speaks of my son, it's like it's just it just is shocking to me. It's shocking, and he can speak for hours and hours about Matthew, and he's got so much good things to say. You know, I've seen Matthew jump naked into that pool, and you know, heaven plays it, and they laugh their heads off. And you know, you look at Jesus just sitting next to you, and he's just crying that Matthew was so deceived and yet so obedient. And heaven watches for sport, and he's just, Jesus is just so invested in Matthew, and you know, and I've seen him coming out of King's Cross. Matthew speaks about how he's walking out of King's Cross once, and he was singing, he's got the whole world in his hands, and I've seen that conversation. I've seen Matthew singing, and I've seen the conversation that Jesus said, you know, the whole world is waiting for you. And Matthew swore at Jesus and told him that he was smoking marijuana and he's off his tree, saying things like that. And now it's coming to pass, and I can see the future, and it's all going to revolve around him. And you know, Jesus is he's the center of heaven, and it's been said in one of Matthew's books, he's like the sun, and the whole of the galaxy of heaven revolves around Jesus.
Wow, that's I'm just in tears, you know. As a mother, I was talking to Matthew a little while ago, and I felt strongly in my spirit that the reason that you didn't believe everything Matthew said, that you wasn't supposed to, because as a mother, I know I've had a daughter that was on drugs. She's been clean now 13 years. That's a miracle of God right there. But I know as a mother that when you think about your child being deceived, and then you know that your child had a mental illness. I have a brother who's bipolar. I mean, I understand what I can understand about that, what I'm able to. But is it true, what me and Matthew, what I said, that you was not supposed to know? Because as a mother, it would have been so hard for you to take that, and that you wasn't going to know that he was, you know, so much of what he said was not deception, but was the truth until you got to heaven. Can you talk about that a little bit, about if I was right about that?
Matthew's always been hidden. You know, he reduced his Facebook by 1,000 people a few weeks ago, but very few people on Facebook know him, and unless you've read all his 55 books, you probably wouldn't know a lot about Matthew. And he's been hidden, and he was hidden from me. And I had no conception. I was just like Mary, Jesus' mother. she just didn't understand her son, and it's just the flesh. It's just the flesh gets in the way. Like Matthew's been talking about crazy things. You know, he believed in this prophecy for 20 years that he's going to be like Billy Graham and one of the biggest preachers in the world. How do you cope with that as a mother? Your son saying that he's going to be the most popular Christian in the world, when you know he can't give up the prostitutes, when you know that he's got a problem with pornography, when you know he can't even get out of bed before noon, when you know he sometimes his hygiene isn't good, and when you know his house isn't clean, and you know his whole life seems out of order, and he thinks that he's going to be this great Christian, and you just look at it. And I remember before I left, he used to ring me every month or so to get a loan of $20 or something to make it through, and I was starting to gain a lot of respect as he spent $100,000 on his books, and he never asked me for a loan ever again over 3 years. And I was starting to get to a point before I left that my son's life is really under control, and he's really getting things in order. But I had no idea of the pain he's been in, and I had no idea that the prostitutes weren't just an addiction. He's self-medicating this pain and this loneliness, and you know, it's like, you know, he said for years that you have no problems as a Christian drinking alcohol and having a few wines at night, but you know, an alcoholic's not allowed to have alcohol to make him feel good and to wipe out his pain, and a Christian's not allowed to have a sex addiction because it makes him feel good. And you know, there's so many Christians saying holiness and got to be lack of sin and stuff, but there's people that have been trying all their life to be healed and still broken. And how can you just condemn those people? How can you say these people can't be in ministry? You know, Matthew's been trying all his life to get healed, and Jesus had me watch every single incident of Matthew being with a prostitute. And the more and the more and the more I watched, the more I started to weep as I realized that this son of mine was just in so much pain. And it wasn't until I spent a copious amounts of time speaking to John Lennon, and us both weeping as we watched Matthew suffer. And, you know, he's earned the stripes, being told that you're not allowed to kill yourself and you'll be risen again, the torture that Matthew's been in, just not wanting to live. And still today he'd leave, you know, still today if Jesus turned up and said it's time to go home, he'd leave, he'd go, you know, he's even dropped the biggest book of his life, and he'd still leave right now. And God said to him years ago, I love you like Enoch, and I want to bring you home, but you've got to stay. You've got to stay. I can't bring you home. You've got a job to do. And, you know, if it was the Old Testament, Matthew would be home. If he wasn't going to be used in this way, he'd be home. If he wasn't going to be the most important person, he'd be home by now. And he's forced to stay. And people just don't know the excruciating pain that he's in. And because he's suffered, because he's gone through all this trauma, he's got the empathy and he's got the compassion for people who've suffered worse. Because he's been pushed to suicide 4 times, everyone who's ever been suicidal will relate to Matthew. Everyone who's been sexually abused will relate to Matthew. Everyone who's been rejected will relate to Matthew. Everyone who's been through divorce will relate to Matthew. Everyone who's been come against by the enemy will relate to Matthew. Everyone who's sick and tired of the Christian church will relate to Matthew. And, you know, it's like in every area Satan's attacked Matthew, it's become a place of authority that Matthew can speak into. And he doesn't give a flying F about who thinks he's good or who doesn't think he's. Of course, it hurts him, but under inspiration, he hasn't got problems mentioning Jim Baker or Bill Johnson creating another god, or Chris Vallotton or Sean Bolts. Doesn't care how big they are and how mighty they are. He's suffered enough. And, the Apostle Paul didn't mention names and then go into why. He just dropped the names. He says, stay away from this one, stay away from this one. And if they want to bring their lawsuits, they can cross Jesus and bring a lawsuit against the Christian brother. They can go their hardest. If they get mentioned in the book of Matthew, they got to go and defend themselves and their honour before their people. But it's not Matthew speaking, it's John speaking.
Wow, this is so good. I'm just learning so much. I met Matthew a couple of years ago, and I was telling him today, I said, Matthew, I don't know why I knew it. I think God wanted me to know of all the people on this earth, and I feel so honored and so privileged, and beyond anything I can even explain. I know Jesus knows my heart. But I knew then that it was like I was opening a box of treasure, and I was starting to read his books. And I would think, God, this is awesome, And the Lord let me see, and he brought me today, and I'm listening, and I totally get it, And someday, I want to ask you about this. Someday, the Bible talks about there'll be no more tears, and you talked about Jesus, and Matthew has talked about Jesus crying and the tears that God sheds for the world, and that they need friends and people that'll just spend time with them. Can you tell us a little bit about what's going to happen whenever there's no more tears? Will the saints remember? Will you remember all of this about your son? Or will that all just be gone away? Once it's all said and done. You know what I'm saying? Like the tears. Someday, will we just not remember any of this, or will it always be part of what we have to remember?
When there's a new heaven and the new earth, the tears will stop. But not until the suffering stops suffering. And can you take the mud? Can you take the mud out of the brick? If the Payne built the foundation, the Payne will always be there. And and Payne just adds character. You've met these people that have had an easy life. They've got no testimony. All they can say is Jesus has been good to me. They've got no examples, of how. And yet the people who've had horrific pain and had horrific suffering, they can speak for hours. I can sing of his love forever, that song says. And Jesus said about Mary Magdalene, he that's been forgiven much loves much. And Matthew's just sinned so many times that his sin has just drawn him really close to the heart of God. And he was suffering for years, and a friend of his said, well, how can God judge you when you've never been healed? When you've been seeking healing in the church and the professional healers have let you down, how can you be judged? When you're trying. And so there's going to come a time when the crying stops, but crying is part of healing. It's abhorrent. It's unbelievable for the church to even accept that God and Jesus cry. But, Jesus just weeps over my son. He just weeps.
Yes.
And there's tears. He goes from weeping compassionate tears of the pain, and then you see him weeping tears of joy. And I've sat down with him, and he's opened up his music box that Matthew talked about, and I've watched the hologram play of Matthew's life. And, you know, Matthew's never seen it, you know, you can just imagine it. But in all the holograms, Jesus is in the scenes of it happening, you know. Jesus was at the other end of the pool when Matthew was doing the dive bombs. He's standing there watching him do it, you know. And Jesus is in all the pictures. And if Jesus played the whole of Matthew's life, he's standing there in all of the pictures, in all of the scenes, in all of the events. And he's just part, you know. And Matthew had no idea what he was signing up for, you know. They show you at the beginning of your life, and you know, before you're sent to earth, they show you your life, but it's just terrific. And he's just built this resilience. Me and Bob, my husband, just built it into him. Told him he was wrong so many hundreds of times that he's just built this resilience that he just doesn't care if people call him wrong anymore. And he's got this self-defense. He's so used to be mentally ill that he doesn't care if he's deceived. Like, you get a major prophet like Jeremiah Johnson, he'd be really upset if he was preaching deception, you know. But Matthew, he's been deceived and deluded so many times that it doesn't even worry him if he's deceived. You know, a sane person would have a problem with it. A teacher would have a problem with it. But Matthew's constantly checking himself with surrounding people to see if he's in deception or delusion, because he just thinks wild thoughts. Who thinks that he can command 6 million angels and turn the Australian election? Like, he doesn't tell that to many people, but I saw him do it. I saw the angels go to all the undecided votes and turn them. You know, I saw him turn the election. And, you know, 2020 is nothing for Trump. Just the same sort of success he had with the Australian election will be the same thing. It just takes one command of angels.
Yes, that's right. Well, I've heard Matthew say different times lately in the videos, and to me, we talked about it, that even when he was in deception, he's understanding now that everything works together for those who love the Lord and are called according to his purpose. And that has helped me so much, because I realize that not just with Matthew, but with myself, anybody, you know, that God will make beauty from ashes, like he's done with Matthew's life. What the devil meant for evil, God had turned around for good. And Matthew, not until he gets on the other side will he totally understand exactly the people that he has touched by the fact that he has been a willing vessel, not always wanting to go through the pain, but he understands, you know, he understands why, you know. And I'm so encouraged, you know, every time I talk to Matthew. And another thing I wanted to ask about the people in heaven, you said that everybody that you see, like, do you get a review of, like, your family, your mother? Do you get a review of their life like you did Matthew's, or do you just kind of explain that a little bit?
And anyone you choose, you can choose anyone. So you can, if you're interacting with Moses on a regular basis, you can throw up Moses's life. If you're interacting with Elijah, you can throw up Elijah's life. And probably take you to watch a full life takes about 6 hours to watch their life. And that's in great detail. But then you could go down the slide for 20 minutes and just watch a segment of 1 year. You know, like, you know how they show, in a movie, in a 2-hour movie, 2-hour and 20-minute movie, they show the entire 60-year life of a person. That's in 2 hours and 20 in Earth time. Well, you know, the entire life of a person in 6 hours of heaven time is like, you know, maybe 2 or 3 weeks. So, you know, you can 6 hours of Earth time in heaven is like, you know, quite a while in time. You know, so you invest a lot of time. It's a very detailed documentary. It's the most extensive thing you've ever seen. So you can review any saint's life on the big screen, and you're open to access anything. But just as you walk down the street, you get like an innate sense of who a person is, and you pretty well understand a person walking down the street as well as you'd understand your best friend.
This just hit my spirit. I wasn't even thinking about it, but when we get to heaven, can you explain a little bit for people? There's so many people that I know that they don't think about it. They don't, about the Bema Seat judgment, the judgment seat of Christ. When we do get there, how that what we do on earth will decide whether it's burned up, or whether it's refined and gold. Can you explain that a little bit?
Well, here's the thing. Matthew talks in so many half of his books about the 50 commands of Jesus. And one way to describe that is the law of love, right? One way to summarize the kingdom is operating in the law of love. So anything that was done through pure love won't be burned up. Right? But if you're doing things through control or to make yourself feel good, or because it's the religious thing to do, or because it'll look good before men, if there's any other motive but love, it'll be burned up. So, most people aren't operating out of love. They're operating out of something else. And many people's good works are done for their own making themselves feel good. Well, you can't be rewarded for making yourself feel good. So
it's all about how you get your rewards in heaven. This is how you earn certain crowns or certain robes or
so there's rewards plus Scripture says you're given an account for every idle word. So every wrong post and every wrong thing you said. There's so many, there's so many Christians who believe, legalistic sort of Christians believe that if you have any unconfessed sin, you won't go to heaven. Well, you do so many sins that you never repent for, right? You can't even think of the amount of times you've sinned without confessing them. So all of those sins will be judged and weighed too, And so it's a long time, and it's embarrassing, because the host of, everyone in heaven will be watching. And so when you're sifted and put in your position, everyone in heaven will agree with that. That's the position that you end up in. And so before that thing, everyone's put in their position. And when it actually happens, people understand why they're in their positions. And it'll be embarrassing for some. And it'll be really, there's no pride in heaven, but some people will really, really have a good day on that day. And when Jesus spoke about the last shall be first and the first shall be last, some of the last people, will be shown for what amazing people they are. And the whole of heaven will realize why they're in their position in heaven. And some of the biggest names in Christian circles will understand why they're in their last position on earth. And so God is a good judge. And I suppose I was the last. For the last 5 years of my life, I was feeling that I was really failing God. And I wasn't reading my Bible, and I wasn't in brackets doing all the religious things. And I felt that I had a really poor faith. But what I was doing was I was talking to my son every day, and I was doing exactly what God had for me. And I was just meant to help my son get to this spot. And you'll notice he left. You'll notice I left when he was on to the John Lennon book. You know,
Yes.
I got him right to this starting point. You know, I came all the way to the finish line of his old life, and now I'm into coaching him in his future life, and so
What I get from this is that. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
So it'll be fair, you know. It'll be fair, and people who think they've hidden things from God will be exposed on that day, and
Yeah.
people who make it into heaven by the skin of their teeth and end up in paradise, they'll know why they're in paradise, and the whole of heaven will know why. And, so you know, people like my former husband. People like my former husband are going to understand why they're there, and yeah.
To be in paradise, is that a place that you're eternally going to be there because of things that you didn't do, or can you get out of paradise and go into these different realms in heaven in time?
You can progress.
As you're taught.
You can progress. Okay. Yeah, but the thief in the cross, when Jesus was dying, Jesus said, "You'll see me in paradise." But that thief isn't in paradise now. He's progressed through the realms of heaven.
Right.
Yeah.
I get from what you just said about yourself that even though you felt like you were failing Matthew at the end, and when he said what he did to you the last time when you had the little argument, you were showing the love that Jesus talks about. You were loving him throughout his life, no matter how you talked to him about what you thought he was being deceived by. Like Bob, I think it was Prophet Bob Jones said while he was still on earth, he went to heaven one time, and Jesus, I think it was him, asked him, "Did you learn to love?" And that, to me, that I've really come to realize. I had a lady the other day, and I don't want to be prideful. She drove me to the doctor, and as we were going, home, she said, I'm not going to be able to eat my dinner. She said, I asked her, about her job, how long, do you work at night? She said, well, I live in a shelter, a homeless shelter, and I'm not going to make it till 6 o'clock so I can eat. And suddenly, I'm not saying this in a bragging way. I don't ever want to do that, but I thought, well, I said to her, you don't have to worry. Jesus just bought your dinner, and I gave her some money, and that has stayed with me because I don't want to be prideful in that. But I even talked to Matthew a little bit. I said, learning to love, that may seem like a small thing, but to me, I felt so good because I was helping this lady, and I thought this is what Jesus would want me to do. But not only that, I felt good doing it. We have to learn to love. That's like Jesus, not prideful.
Yeah. So I loved Matthew the best way I could, and apparently I did a good job because I'm in a great position in heaven. And so much of Matthew's understandings and ethics and love and personality comes from me. His outgoing nature, speaking to strangers, comes from my husband. And as long as you're operating in love, that's an important thing. And so the whole of what Jesus taught is the law of love. And the law isn't, John says in his letters that the commands of Jesus aren't burdensome, and it shouldn't be a heavy weight on you. It's just the best way to love people.
And I've learned from this conversation about Jesus is truth, the way and the truth and the life. And what you said a while ago, you were talking, he was talking, he can talk to any of these different denominations, and he can show them truth. No matter, he reaches them on the level that they'll understand. He's not teaching them error, but he's teaching truth, and that's so important. What you said. Well, before I let you go, June, it's been about 45 minutes. If it's okay, I'd just like to ask something about, my life and how am I doing and anything that the Lord would want me to know.
Well, your assignment is to be a connector and be a friend to people. And There's many people that you're just going to have one encounter with, and just be love, just be Jesus, and you don't even have to mention Jesus' name. Just be love. You know, angels can tell that person that must be an authentic Christian. You might have to even tell them you're a Christian. Just love people. Just be love. Just demonstrate love wherever you go, and acceptance, and try not to judge people, and try and lift people up. And then you're used in your chief apostle's life, and you're used in Matthew's life like an armor bearer. You hold up their arms and you encourage them, and you've got a good role in that. And you're always going to be special to Matthew. And who knows, as millions of dollars comes in to Matthew's ministry, who knows whether you'll move to Australia and come and be in his own city and stuff, and even move your family over here or whatever. So you just relax and keep on doing what you're doing. You're doing a fantastic job, and you've really done a great work being Matthew's friend. And I've got tremendous love for you, Mary. You know, you've played a better role in Matthew's life than I did. And that's because you're on the same page with him. I was never on the same page with my son. And so for the last 3 years, you've been, supporting him. And even Matthew's next door neighbour that he sees once every few months, she's played a better role than me. So I've got some catching up to do, but it was a real honour to speak to you today, and it must have been exciting for you to be able to review this video and watch this video and have it up on Matthew's videos. Mary Gibson interviews Matthew Robert Payne about heaven.
Wow, Matthew, my God. I feel like a new woman. I feel like a new woman. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Only God help me get through that. It was not as hard as I thought it would be, because, oh my goodness, thank you. As long as I live, I'll never forget the opportunity that I was just given, you know.
Oh, it's nothing. You know, you're just talking to Matthew's mother. You know, I'm just a simple person. I'm just like Matthew. It's nothing, really. You know, I wish I was in Matthew's place to put you on the phone when I was on earth and living, but that was never the case. I actually talked to Matthew's editor one time, and we did like a editing read-through of the book with Matthew's editor, and so Matthew's editor has spoken to me, but I'm so overjoyed to meet Matthew's good friend, and you keep on being his friend, and from time to time I'll talk to you again.
Awesome. Thank you. God bless. Oh, Matthew, this was so good. I'm just thrilled that the Lord, thinks enough of me. There's a song, "Who am I that a king would bleed and die for? The question I may never know, how he ever loved me so. But to an old rugged cross he'd go to, who am I?" And that's the way I feel right now. Who am I? But I take it very seriously. And I'm going to let you go for now. Got to run to the bathroom, but this has been beyond anything I could ever hope for. And obviously I didn't even think I'd do it. That's probably why you asked me to do it, because you knew I would never expect it. Oh, Lordy.
Okay, so we'll close it off there, and thanks, Mary, and I'll close the video off now. So if you enjoyed that video, press thumbs up. God bless.